Episode 86 of People I Know Show. Curt Carstensen today with Ross Meisner. Hello, Ross. You've been on the podcast before. Welcome back.
Thank you, Curt. Nice to be here.
Ross, I looked it up. It was episode 35, almost a year and a half ago. We talked about things such as the lizard brain, free will, Elon Musk, and Tesla. At least that's what I titled it. I don't think we're going to get into too much of that today. Other things have been going on that I want to talk about. And based on our friendship and your level of curiosity that I think is very similar to mine, I wanted you to be on with me to talk about my recent experience with having COVID-19. So before I talk about myself, I want to know what in your life, as specific as you want to get, what's your experience been like through the pandemic and knowing people maybe that have had it, or have you had it? I have no idea.
Well, I'll be very curious about your experience because I have not had it yet, and I have not had anyone in my family have it yet, in my immediate family. So I'll be curious to hear how it went for you. I know that there's a wide range of experiences and severity and symptomaticity. But on my end, I've had, some work colleagues that have had it, but were out of the office before it struck. I've had some neighbors that have had it. So it's been still a degree or two removed from my immediate environment.
Okay. And I'd imagine, unfortunately, we're going to all know more and more people that have it soon because the numbers are going crazy. And it seems like it's really hard to avoid right now if you were leaving your home.
I'm afraid so. I'm afraid that's where we're at with the increase in cases. Fortunately, the rate of cases leading to hospitalizations getting a little better, and the rate of hospitalizations leading to death is a little better. So they're going up, but they're not going up as fast and in the same proportion as they did earlier this year.
Yeah, it's scary, and I guess we'll get into my experience here in just a second, because I know from my experience that I'm glad I seem to have been healthy before it, because I just picture people that are less healthy having a really tough time with some of the things that I went through, and I was healthy. So when you hear me having it, what questions come to mind immediately?
Well, I am curious because the index case here where I live in Anoka County was a healthy young male, very active, very fit, in his upper 30s, I believe. And it almost took his life. He was in the hospital for weeks. It was touch and go. So I know that there's no guarantee, even when you're a young, healthy person like yourself. I am curious how you would describe your symptoms and how severe you thought it was.
I call it moderate, meaning, and what moderate means to me could be very different to someone else, that I never got to the point where I thought maybe I need to go to the hospital. Like, that thought really didn't occur to me. I guess I'm not someone that really thinks that anyhow. Mm-hmm. I just feel like I'll get better on my own. But it wasn't minor in some way where I didn't think it was that bad. It was bad enough where, as I was having it, my thought was, people should not want to get this. This is kind of miserable. I had about 10 days where the symptoms were, maybe more than 10 days. Actually, it's probably closer to 2 weeks where I felt some kind of symptom every day. And most of those days, I just didn't have a ton of energy to want to do anything. Like, I thought I'm going to be at home all this time. Maybe this is kind of good in some ways. I can do some things at home. And I just didn't have any energy or motivation to do anything almost any day. And I have a list of all the symptoms I went through. I kept track. I was told to keep track of my temperatures and my symptoms every day. So
I'm curious. Yes.
For most of 2 weeks, I wrote things down. And a couple of things to point out is the highest recorded temperature I had. It's possible my little cheap thermometer wasn't precise, or that maybe I had a higher temperature before I took my first temperature, but the highest one I recorded was 100.8. So up there a little bit, but not some crazy high number that some people experience. So that was bad. Mm-hmm. But for the most part, I hung in like the 99 range. Mm-hmm. And other symptoms that I wrote down over the course of a week and a half were, well, the reason that I thought I might have it for the first time, like really seriously thought, I woke up one day very sore on my lower back, my butt, my legs, just everything. And not like I slept wrong sore. It's my body had something wrong and I'm sore. So that was the first indication. And I had really minor headaches before that for a couple days and just the lightest cough. And then I had the body aches for 2 days. And then as I go through this list, it's going to be basically 2 or 3 times taking my temperature every day and writing down my symptoms. Headache, cruddy throat, slight sore throat, minor headache, runny nose, sinus, sneezing, runny nose, feeling warmer than typical, minor headache, lingering headache, diarrhea, threw up, minor headache, diarrhea. And that that was like my least favorite thing.
So you were sick. You were genuinely sick.
Yeah. And the symptoms kept changing where I would feel good maybe half the days I would wake up, and it might have been based on the medication, over-the-counter medication. Like for a few nights I took Aleve PM, which knocked me out, had me sleep well, and I woke up feeling good with the thought that, okay, this maybe I've turned the corner and this is going away. And then sometime later in the afternoon, the headache would come on again or something else, and it'd just be like, oh, here we go, another day gone of me not feeling good. When's this going to stop? And that was something that I dealt with about half of the day. Some days I woke up not feeling good, and the other days I felt pretty good, and then just got worse again.
Wow. So yeah, those are pretty, I mean, it's a variation on the cold virus, right? But the diarrhea and the throwing up, those are pretty serious symptoms.
Yeah, and I wonder if the throwing up was just the way I ate that morning or something I ate, or if it was a part of what was happening with the gastrointestinal issues that I'd had for more days than I wanted.
Well, my understanding is that the virus affects, or is capable of affecting, a lot of different organs in different ways, but also quite randomly. So that it was affecting your GI tract just might have been your particular flavor of infection that you had.
Yeah, I don't know. It was.
So here's my question to you. I'm interested in the process as you started to get symptomatic, your thought process on, gee, is it a cold? Is it the flu? Is it COVID? And when and how you decided to get checked.
Yeah, that's, I guess, the important thing now, because throughout my life, I would start to maybe get sick. And I think most people probably experience it similarly, where you feel like, okay, something's not quite right. It's not that bad. And you just kind of let time play out. Maybe you ramp up your vitamins or something. But for the most part, you know, something's coming and then you'll deal with it. But for this, knowing that every possible sickness or any possible symptom could be one of the COVID-19 symptoms, and how important it is and should be to not possibly expose anyone to it once you have it, then I guess it was a Thursday or Friday a few weeks ago where I had the first inclination of the possibility that something wasn't quite right, but I still felt good. I think it might have been the really minor cough. Like I can't imagine coughing any less, but still coughing. Like my body's making me cough, but it's almost nothing. And I did that once or twice a day for a couple days, and it seemed strange. And then with that, I got a headache, which I get headaches sometimes. But then I think I got the headache the next day, coughed a little bit. So a couple days of headaches and a real little coughing where I thought it's possible. And in that time, I was wearing a mask virtually everywhere I went, like normal. But the thought was, I better keep my mask on even more than I possibly would, just in case I do have it. But it was also tough because I felt good. I didn't really think I had, like I took some medicine for my headache and the headache went away. And I didn't really think I had it, but it's just a thought, could I possibly have it now? Could I be one of these people that has it and doesn't know it? If I am, I'm going to make sure that I'm being extra careful. So that was, and I didn't really think about actually, you know what? I did think about getting tested, but then I ran out of time one day and didn't really give it a lot of thought the next day. And then the following day I woke up with the body aches, and then I maybe a headache too. And I realized, okay, this is something, this is where I need to get tested. So I tried to get tested that day. It was a Sunday. There wasn't much of anything available short notice. Actually, I couldn't find anything available on short notice. So I booked one for Monday. And in the meantime, with my workplace, I'd called in sick because I knew I better not go in. And through the processes there, they have their own clinic and they have a rapid results test. So I actually got tested on a Monday morning at 11:30 a.m. I had my appointment, the swab up in my nose by 11:35, and by noon they called me and told me I was positive, which was like the best thing of the process, getting the results very fast, because I know a lot of people have to spend a couple days kind of wondering that they don't have it. And if, I guess, for those people, if the rate's coming in at 10 or 15, 20%, most of these people don't have it, but are living life like they have it for 2 days or more.
Right.
I fortunately only had to spend less than a half hour wondering, okay, do I have it based on this test?
Nice. And so that does make a difference. I should mention that my son got a cold or got symptomatic. And so we brought him in for a test, and we had to wait about 3 days to get the results. So we're acting as if he's got it. We're, keeping him isolated, and then it comes back negative.
Yeah.
So yeah, it kind of, it impacts your life even more than COVID already has. And I think these rapid tests are going to be key to getting the information out to the public more on how to manage our lives and how to be responsive so that we can knock this increase back down.
Maybe with your background, you'd better be able to understand this, but I know one of the leaders in getting the rapid results test, I believe this was like the National Basketball Association and some of these sports leagues that found it important to test regularly and rapidly. And I think it was, and if it wasn't then maybe I'm mishearing some information, but that's where it started. Like that technology was, a lot of money was put into that in that way for them. And now obviously it's more places, but it's still not that prevalent.
Right.
It seems to me that over these months, that if that would have been a focus, get results faster, make tests more available, whatever the process is, so that people that could have the experience like me and knowing that they have it right away and get a test relatively easily, or finding out they don't have it, the world could continue as close to normal as possible if that was solved. And with all the money spent to give to businesses and people and all the places money went, couldn't have more money went to get more testing done faster, and we could be living more like normal right now?
There seems to be little doubt, at least in my mind, that a unified, thoughtful response nationwide would have had a better effect on testing, the quality and rate of testing. Would have, masks don't need to be political. Masks are just a way to reduce the community infection rate. And I think a lot of those things, relatively small steps, don't shut down the economy, don't shut everything down, but these small steps and these consistent policies applied across the states would probably have put us on a different course, similar to what we see in most other countries. They're not having the same uptick that we're having.
Yeah, I don't think to this degree, and still some of them are shutting down again for a while.
Yeah.
Which to me, and I guess some cities or states are doing some of that right now, but it seems like kind of halfway. Mm-hmm. I feel like there's just not an appetite to do it again fully, and we're not going to, and we're just dealing with it, which has kind of been the attitude of a lot of people from the start. But I think if we just would have not done anything from the start, it would have been catastrophic in a way that it's obviously still bad, but I think having those months for more people and more places to kind of get situated and figure out how to deal with this within their current life, I think that helped a lot to just buy more time. But this wave here is a beast. It seems like
it is a beast. It's going to be bad. We're coming into the winter time. We're coming into the holidays. People aren't going to be outside. People are still going to want to socialize. This is a very concerning trend. And yeah, we're tired. We're already tired. These kinds of slow and abstract dangers, the pandemic, climate change, things like that, they're hard for a community, meaning humanity, to respond to because it's not clear and present danger. And so, okay, if I adjust my behavior a little bit, then maybe somebody in some other state won't die. Mm-hmm. Well, that's pretty abstract.
Yeah, I went through that. Like, I suppose everybody else gives some thought to how I need to change my behavior. And I ended up like still doing a lot. I think I would try to be outdoors as much as possible while doing things. And then at certain points that outdoors isn't really as good of an option. And I guess the question you haven't asked me yet is, how do you think do I know how I contracted it?
Well, I've got two more questions. That was
Okay.
one of them. Do you know where it came from? And just so you know, my next question is, how did you adjust your behavior afterwards, your self-quarantine, process and that kind of stuff? I'm curious about where it came from and what you did to limit, the impact.
Yeah. So I work in an environment where I'm around people and I'm wearing masks and we sanitize things all the time. And I'm confident with the amount of hours I put in at my workplace over the last month, since it was like June 1st, I went back. I'm confident that the virus does not spread so much at my workplace. Maybe not at all. Like I like, obviously I got it, but I probably got it elsewhere. That's what I think. In the two most likely situations, so I don't know exactly where I got it. I'll never know. But I did have one particular restaurant experience where I ate inside at a place that I think was doing some, like the measures are supposed to do to not use every booth and every table. But what they did, they had a table with 8 people not that far from my booth. And not to say one of those people had it, but they very well could have. And that was a lot of people sitting around for an hour around the same time that I was, where we had not had our masks on for at least some of the time. Like, I think I had mine on when I wasn't eating,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't think any of them had it on from the moment they sat down, or even if they had one when they walked in. I don't even know.
Right.
So that was a thought, like, okay, there's a chance it could come from there. But also, I do Uber and Lyft driving. I haven't done much, but one weekend, the weekend before I knew I had the virus, I gave a few rides. And even if we're wearing masks in there with this, it's a small space. And if someone's in my vehicle for 20 minutes, where I think a couple people were, there's still, I think, virus escaping that very well could have been left around for me to breathe in eventually and get it. To me, that's probably the most likely situation. But I don't know. And
Yeah.
that's another question.
Yeah. Well, I suspect that's true too, because you're in a service job, but because everybody knows that you have to be interacting with people in that job, they're being very careful, right? They're and very diligent. I have no doubt. But I do know, I mean, in the early mapping of the transmission vectors, there were maps of people sitting in restaurants and how it moved from table to table because of the way the air conditioning vent was set up. And if the air conditioning vent moved this way, but the table over there didn't get it, but the table on the right side did. So things like that, they're known transmission vectors when people aren't wearing masks.
Yeah, and I'd had some restaurant experiences. Very rarely would I eat inside, even though it's like been open. But it was that day that I ate inside, it was cold. Like, there's no eating outside anymore. So if you want to have some going out to eat experience,
Yep.
which I did that day, that was what you do. And the risk was there whether or not I got it there or not.
Right. Yes. And so my last question was then your self quarantine and your, any changes or your philosophy on making sure that you didn't affect anybody else when you were probably infectious. And since then, has it changed your behavior?
Yes, behaviors kind of changed sharply in those times. In one of the greatest coincidences in world history, I might be exaggerating a little bit, but my housemate, my roommate, he took a 10-day getaway. He left the day that I think I might have had my first symptom. He was gone by that morning. So I was already going to be in the house by myself for the most part, unless I had anyone over, for about a week and a half. And the timing matched perfectly. So I didn't inconvenience him. I had the whole house to do whatever I wanted. And the days passed. And when he was coming back, he decided to still wait a few days, stay somewhere else for a few days, and not come back. So I didn't see him for, I think it was 13 days. And then he finally did come back, and I wore a mask around the house and tried to like not be near him. And then the next day I was feeling better and I didn't wear my mask, and he hasn't gotten sick. It seemed to have go quite well in that way. And before I had my test results, so actually, and this I guess is questionable, and I now looking back, maybe I shouldn't have done it, but after I got my test, I still didn't think it was that likely that I had it, I guess is my thought. I stopped at a pharmacy quick because I needed some things, because I knew I might not be going anywhere. So I was in the pharmacy super quick. When anyone was anywhere near me, I'd like hold my breath, and I got my supplies quick and got out of there. So I guess I don't know what the risk is at that point. And here's another thing that I wanted to bring up. When I got tested, I came across with the two individuals, a person that worked at the reception area and the nurse that took my test. I was kind of surprised that the nurse, or excuse me, the receptionist person who opened the door for me, she was within a couple feet of me. She was wearing the more standard blue disposable mask, nothing more, even though there's a risk of people like me that had it but didn't know it for sure yet, coming in her path, which I guess gave me some confidence that if that's what they decided is enough, and it does, the virus with two people wearing masks, even if the person has it, in real brief interaction, that it must not be that likely that she's getting sick. Otherwise, she would wear something stronger. I'd imagine it was available. The other lady had it.
Yeah, the N95 mask.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a little surprised that anybody in healthcare wouldn't use an N95 mask, because the majority of the benefit of mask is reducing the particulate flow out of our breath and out into the air around us. It doesn't really inhibit the virus coming in when you breathe in. It might inhibit some particles if there's moisture and stuff, if they're big enough to catch the cloth. But yeah, I'm a little surprised that she would use that basic mask.
Yeah, so that makes me feel slightly better about my quick pharmacy experience. That if everyone was wearing masks, which they were, and I really did my best to avoid everyone and got in and I got out, that if I didn't infect anyone there, of all the people in my contacts that I came across within like a week, basically of getting the virus, none of them turned up having it. So I'm fairly confident I did not give it to anybody, which I guess is a win for me personally and how I feel about myself and how I did. Even though I could have done better, it seems like I didn't give it to anyone. But now, I think, to answer the second part of your question, now that I've had it, I feel like I wouldn't advise anyone getting it, but I'm so glad to have already had it.
Yeah.
Because I'm past the point where I can give the virus to anyone. I'm in the whatever range, which I think is unknown precisely, that I could get it again. And so I'm living my life certainly with masks all the time, but I feel like I can move about the world with a different level of confidence than most people can or should right now. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's the way I'm living. It's a really good space to be, I guess, now to have already had it and be healthy again.
Yeah, I'm sure it's a relief to not have that sword hanging over your neck of the first exposure. The information on reinfection rates is almost non-existent. There are cases of reinfection, so it's not guaranteed immunity that if you've had it once, you won't get it again, because there have been cases. But the very limited directional information suggests that it's much less likely to infect you again.
So yeah, I can see why people should want to get a vaccine when it's ready. And I know it's not that far away, because I feel like, okay, I've been vaccinated, but even better than a vaccination, I've had it. My body precisely knows how to fight it off. It did it.
Yep.
And I feel really great about having already had it.
As long as the virus doesn't mutate again, right?
Yes, which is a risk.
It comes from a mutation. There are already minor variations in it. The scientists can kind of tell, where a particular virus came from. So there are some very small differences in the virus infections that if they want to, they can discern where the virus came from. So it's pretty fascinating. And these things do mutate, whether it's going to be in a year or 10 years or 50 years, we don't know, but something more will happen,
Yeah, I totally anticipate that this is just one more, maybe of the long-term common colds that we have. It's just the first run of it. is more dangerous and more severe because no one's had this one quite yet. But as we go through the years, we'll get it again, and the risk will be lower and lower every time.
Hopefully, you know, as we eventually do get to herd immunity, as they call it, maybe it won't keep us from getting infected, but maybe it will keep us from being so symptomatic and so at risk of a severe health outcome.
Yeah, speculation, but based on what I've understood from the other coronaviruses, that's the process it takes. And even with the like flu strains, if you get a first time flu strain that no one's prepared for, it wreaks a lot more havoc than when it mutates a little bit, and we've seen some version of it before. Is that?
Yeah, and it's got around a few times, and our bodies are more prepared to deal with it.
Yep.
Yeah. Yep. And then there's maybe a last comment on the testing. You know, I'm a fan of Elon Musk for the most part, but he went and got the test done 4 times on the same day, and 2 of them came back positive and 2 of them came back negative. And that has really started an interesting discussion. And he did the test where you have to wait. It's called PCR. And depending on how you do PCR, it's usually very definitive. But if it's a cyclical thing. And if you cycle it enough times, you increase the odds of finding a positive outcome, which is kind of a strange thing. So now there's a bit of a dialogue going on about the type of test. You had the rapid test and the confidence we have in those test results. And I don't have a good answer to that. I'm just throwing out a bit of recent news.
You hear false positives occasionally, and I suppose then there's also going to be false negatives. Is one of them more likely? Like they said I had it and I went through a bunch of symptoms, so that should be pretty concrete that I had it. But if somehow my test would have been negative, but I still had it and went through those symptoms, that would have been a weird unknown, or maybe I would have gotten tested again. I probably would have.
Well, like my son was symptomatic. Turns out he just had a cold, you know, at least according to the one negative test result.
So it doesn't sound like a 100% test is like that doesn't really exist. It's above 50%, but less than 100. It seems to be in that range. What would we do?
This is not a new question. This is not a new issue. Every test is imperfect. Doesn't matter what test you go to get your colon cancer tested or whatever. There's always some percentage, maybe small, of false negative and false positives. It's just something that we try to improve on over time. I'm interested. So I have not been sick for many months during this whole period. I've been thinking about going in and doing an antibody test, which is a little bit different test that tells you if you've ever had COVID in the past, because maybe half or more of infections are asymptomatic. We're not exactly sure what the number is. And, you know, I'm out and about in the community, and I'm wearing a mask and I'm doing things, and my kids see other kids occasionally. And so there are vectors into my household. And I've been kind of curious to know if I've been exposed to it. And so I'm thinking about getting an antibody test.
I think that's a great idea. If that's available to you, why not? And I'd love to hear what you learned from it later.
I'll let you know.
Is there any more on the COVID that, whether it's me or what's happening currently, that you want to chat about, or are we ready?
Well, if we talk about it anymore, we'll just get depressed with the trajectory we're on. So let's leave it there.
Yeah, I think my last thought is it's not surprising that in the 2 weeks after Halloween, the numbers kept moving up, and now we're less than 2 weeks as we record this before Thanksgiving. And I'd imagine a lot of people are going to do Thanksgiving much differently this year, but I also imagine a lot of people are just going to do it the same.
Right.
And with this trend upward with cases into another major holiday, which will carry over and probably extend into the next major holiday, and then the one that happens a week later, I don't know. This is bad deal.
It's not a promising trend from several dimensions: the weather, the social nature of these holidays, and the fatigue that I think we're feeling about dealing with this. Partly because, expectations back in spring, certain government officials kept saying, oh, it'll go away fast, it'll go away fast. And of course it hasn't, and it's not going to. And I think that was a disservice to the nation to not set expectations more realistically.
Well, I don't know that this nation is really focused on always trying to do the best for everyone. And, not just the last few years. I really think there's a lot of things that we maybe won't get into today that just aren't the best for the people of this country, and things just don't change. And this was an example this year, coronavirus pandemic, seeing our country at work and how many things that we certainly could have improved on. And you, Ross, are someone that must have seen something you thought you could improve on in your local school board as we transition through the elections. I want to talk about maybe one of the smallest scales of elections that exists. I don't know, maybe there's something you would say is even smaller than a school board, but it's very small, community-based. You were in an election recently, and good news, I guess, if your goal was to win, you now have a place on the Fridley school board.
Correct. Thank you. Yes, it is a small local election. Maybe dog catcher is a little bit more local, but yes. And as I've matured through life and seen the importance of community to me and my family and to our cities and how we live, you kind of start wanting to give back a little more. I have had a good life, and many people have helped me develop as a young man, and I appreciate that that volunteer energy that people put into schools and communities and mayors and government officials and things. So I've been working on increasing my game in that sense. I was a school board president of a charter school for 6 years, and we were really doing some great things. And the charter school is very successful, and it's an interesting model. And then after a few years passed, I thought, well, the public schools, it's a very important institution. They're struggling. They're, like any organization or business, there's always finite resources, financial and capacity and space and other things. So how do you take those finite resources and serve your constituents, your students, as effectively as possible? And I thought, well, I have some experience. I've got some business leadership experience. I care about the community. So I decided to run for the school board. And yes, I did win. There were 3 very good people that were running, and only 1 seat. And I'll be sworn into the school board in December.
Explain to me this, Ross, as I voted for the school board here in my area, the other side of the Twin Cities. And I had never seen any of these people's names before. I'm not someone that's been around a long time here. I don't recall seeing anything coming in the mail or anyone leave anything on my doorknob or anything of any kind to know who these people were. So what is it that you did to get more votes than the other people, especially knowing that some of the people that went to vote have heard of none of you?
Correct. And maybe more than just some. It's been a weird election year, not just for the local races, but even more broadly. One of the key methods for getting your name out and your stance on issues is to knock doors. There's just no alternative in a campaign, especially a local campaign, than knocking on doors, talking to people, putting a piece of literature on the doorstep. That is by far the most effective way to win an election. And in this election cycle, I and my opponents did none of that. Some people did a little bit, some remote door knocking and walking around. I can't speak for them, but I did notice that they weren't doing it either. And I chose to simply be virtual. The Facebook page, the website. I have access to email lists of voters. When you run for an office, you can get some of that information, so you can reach out to people who have voted in the past. So there are some online, electronic methods for getting your message out. But there's no escaping the fact that this time around it was a very low-key election.
So how do you think you won? Like who would have voted for you? Like
Yeah.
you've
So
been there a long time. You know a lot of people.
that's correct.
Your
That's what I was
name
going to say.
slightly more recognizable for the average person.
I suspect that it was just the cumulative name recognition from years of being active in the community. And to my knowledge, my two opponents, as qualified as they were, just haven't got that history of 20 years in the community that I have. So I'm pretty sure that the name recognition was higher for me, and it would seem, and I would like to believe, that the name recognition has a positive connotation when people think of it. And so they thought, oh, Ross is, if they know the name, Ross is running for school board. Yeah, I saw him do this in the community, or I've heard about him over here doing that, and I know he's a good guy secondhand. I think that's what carried the election.
So here's how I voted in my local school board. I think I could have voted for more than two, but I voted for two people, and I have no idea who you ran against or how this is going to connect with your race. But I picked the names of the people that I thought were most likely to be first or second generation American to get more diversity on the local school board. I didn't know anybody, and I thought that's one of the problems in this country still in the highest positions. I mean, something different this year with the vice president elect, but for the most part, it's just white guys, and then more recently, white ladies, but not so much else. And so I picked the names that I thought were not white guys or white ladies. And whatever this is about me, I don't know if that's like some reverse racism or reverse racism in some way. I don't know if that's even a thing, but that's what I did because I didn't know anybody. And I thought, well, if I'm going to vote at all, either I shouldn't vote or here's something that I see more diversity is good.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that relates to your election.
It does. So I don't know if your listeners have noticed, but I'm a white male. And it was actually a very explicit thought. As I went to run, I thought, wait a minute, do I want to put myself out there as a white male into whether it's local or higher level of government that already has an excess of white males? And I really thought about it. And then as much as I agree with your voting strategy, and I actually do, I think it's great. I also thought that shouldn't keep me from wanting to actively support my community. So it was a recognition of both good points, that we need more diversity in our leadership, and I'm all for that. But I don't necessarily want the less diverse historical people to stop caring or to stop contributing, but just, maybe participate in other ways that opens doors for more people. It was an explicit thought process that I went through.
In me knowing you, like I would have voted for you over, I don't know the other people, because I know how thoughtful and how good your intentions are, which I think is probably easiest at the lowest levels of like government or elected positions where there's not as much pressure put on. But I just know that the people that get to these high levels have so many influences that even though their best intentions might have led them into whatever election processes some years ago, it becomes tougher and tougher to do that. But I'd imagine for you now at this point in your life with what you have going on, you can honestly do a great job in that role without influences to not saying that anyone's going to corrupt the local school board, but I just think that's not you. So you will do a good job.
Well, I certainly hope so. And I appreciate that vote of confidence. And one of the things that played a role in my thinking, and I was both thrilled to have this realization and dismayed to have this realization, and is that as the Black Lives Matter movement flourished, after George Floyd and reading things. And I read about, the nature of Facebook and Twitter and social media and Google to feed up things to my screens that they deem amenable to me. And I've heard of that before. I'm aware of it. I'm in technology. And I thought, wait a minute, this is concerning. So I just like 3 days after the George Floyd killing, did some research and found a half a dozen Black Lives Matter thought leaders and liked them all and subscribed them all to them all and started reading them. And this is where I was thrilled and dismayed. I was thrilled to learn more about things that I did not fully understand. And I was dismayed that I had to learn them. I have traveled the world. I've been working with different cultures. I think I am as little biased as anybody it can be, I think. But I still wasn't sensitized. I still wasn't aware of the realities. I didn't didn't fully appreciate the things that I didn't understand that the Black Lives Movement was trying to raise attention to. So, on the one side, I'm happy to report I'm still learning at an older age, and that's a good thing. And it was a humbling thing. I'm a lot more humble about realizing that I don't understand all sides of every issue yet.
So from what you've learned after reading all this, is there something that you think that you can take to the Fridley School Board, even as a white guy, that will, one of these new concepts or ideas or thoughts that you think you can be really effective at helping
Oh, yes.
everyone at school that you wouldn't have done 6 months ago, you wouldn't have known about?
I absolutely think so. And there are probably many examples. One that just pops to mind, there's part of the American ideal that we pull ourselves up by our bootstraps and we're responsible for ourselves, and anybody can be successful in America if you have the will and you work hard, and that's kind of the American dream. Anybody can be whatever you want to be if you're willing to work hard. Well, when you read about the biases systemically in our government and our society, you realize that that's not equally true, right? The ability to work hard and be successful is fundamentally unequal still in certain races, in certain areas. And when you read about reparations, right? Reparations is a hot topic, and I always thought, the conversation about reparations for Blacks, it seems strange. It seems like, really, and holy cow, have I learned about that? And the systemic disadvantages or the extra hurdles that had to be overcome for people that didn't come from my same background or that don't look like me, makes me realize that, yeah, we're not starting from the same point. So lifting ourselves up by our bootstraps and making ourselves successful, I'm working hard and somebody else is working hard, but the system that enables success is not applied equally. And so, yeah, I've learned a lot of things that I hope to bring to the school board.
There is equity both financially and in connections and networks and opportunities that generations before you have potentially given to a baby that's born. And sometimes it's very clear, but in the more in the space that it might not be as obvious, it still exists. And there's some people that just are born with no advantages.
That's correct.
And some people are born with some advantages, and some people are born with every advantage possible.
But these are not obvious things. They're very subtle. They're very nuanced. Like you say, one thing is generational wealth, right? Does somebody own land? Do they own a house? Things like this. Do they own a farm? Generational wealth puts grandkids and great grandkids in a better footing to start. The ability to get mortgages, the ability to get loans, things like this. I've never had a problem getting a loan for a property. but other people have for no other reason than some of these very subtle disadvantages.
Mm-hmm. So some big things happening in the Fridley School Board soon. And I know that earlier in the spring, you had aspirations for a different position. And I guess it was early in the pandemic, and I think things were different then. You can talk about that if you want. But I guess in general, do you think you have a political future or not? Where's your thoughts on that right now?
Well, it's a good question. Yes, I threw my hat into the ring this spring to run for state senate when an unexpected announcement that the senator in my district was not going to run for re-election, and was immediately followed up by someone running for her seat that seemed to be a coordinated handoff. And I thought, the politics, you got to have a choice. That's how democracy works when people have a chance to dialogue and compare candidates. So even though it was not a lot of time available and didn't really have a chance to mount a great campaign, I at least put my hat in the ring to seek the endorsement for the candidate. And I didn't win the endorsement, and that was fine. But it led to some good conversations and a realization that, yeah, this might be something that I will look into in the future. I like the people who are representing us now. So it's not like I'm driven to replace someone that I think isn't doing a good job. But I'll monitor the options and see, what the different ways are that I can serve our community.
I think, Ross, if given the opportunity, you'd make a great president of the United States, or anyone like you that is thoughtful and has great concern for people. Because I don't know that we've always had that necessarily. I think there's been some decent people that have risen to that position, but not so much always. And for most people, it came down to two choices recently. And one of them got more votes than the other and appears to have won the Electoral College. And it should be obvious that it's over, but it's kind of lingering on. I guess in general, in talking about the Biden-Trump election, you had your own election going on, so I don't know how much mental space you were giving other people's elections. But boy, it's just been a sense of relief for me that it seems to be going okay. And yes, there's some legal challenges that seem to be unfounded. I like evidence. I'd be happy to see evidence of all the reasons that there was fraud. If there was fraud, there shouldn't be fraud, and fraudulent people should be penalized in the ways that they're supposed to be. But yeah, I guess I'm throwing lots of things at you at once, but just your reaction following the big national event that we just had earlier this month.
Yeah, there was an election going on, wasn't there? Yeah, I noticed that. I'm thrilled that it's over as well, partly just to bring the political noise down from the last year and a half. Our long election cycles drive me insane. I'm pleased with the result, and I am, there's just no softballing it. I'm deeply fearful of what Trump is doing right now. It is the first time in our history where an elected official, especially a president at a high level, is simply choosing to ignore the results of an election. There's no basis to believe that he won or that there was a miscount. His own lawyers, all the independent checks and balances confirm that this was a very secure election, and the results are as we see them. I saw one anecdote of fraud that was found, and it was a Republican trying to vote for his dead mother. So, that's the only actual charge, the only actual, legal action taken so far on any fraudulent claim was that one incident, to my knowledge. So everything else is just Trump talking, trying to spread a rumor. And why I am so fearful is because it seems like the Republican Party has decided that they have a better chance of staying in power if they bring into question the actual electoral process itself. And that is a potential death knell to a democratic nation like ours. So, Trump can have a tantrum all he wants, and I accept that, as stupid as and pointless as it is. But the fact that the rest of the Republicans around him are not speaking up and not pointing out that he just lost by the same amount of electoral college votes that he won by 4 years ago, which he called a landslide and a mandate. And now some Republicans are, but far too many are not calling him out and saying, hey, you got to accept this. And this is what is really concerning to me.
This is a very divisive election. It seems like most people have taken a hard line on which side they're on. And my most recent podcast episode, I had my cousin on with me, and he is a Republican and a Trump supporter. And I am definitely left of Republican, whatever I want to call myself. I think I voted for all Democrats this election because that was pretty much the only other option. And I supported Biden, although, again, I'll say it every time. He's okay. I'm not thrilled about him. It's just the alternative of Trump to me is about the worst possible thing. And I think, speaking as someone that just recently voted Democrat, one of the biggest concerns for me, besides Trump's actions, some of the policies, not terribly unreasonable. Some of them are. So I can see how people can agree with some of the policies and for that reason back him or feel like they have to back him, whatever that is. But one of the biggest concerns is his poor behavior in so many ways, the actions that he takes and the way that he presents publicly, how time and time again, virtually no one from the Republican Party stands up to him because they're afraid of him. They're afraid of how much it's going to hurt their election chances in the future. They're afraid of all the negatives that no one seems to, and I shouldn't say no one because there has been a few, but they've had to like basically bow out because they know they're not going to win.
Right.
Virtually no one can stand up to his ridiculousness. And policy aside, maybe Democrats would do the same thing in some way with their own candidate. I guess that's possible, but it really makes me question the individuals aligned with that party. Like, don't do that. Be honest. Stand up for something once in your damn life.
I totally agree with what you're saying. And that's why I'm so mad at so many of these leading Republicans. Okay, whether it was accidental or deliberate, Trump got a stranglehold on the conservative voter base. He's got it, however that came to pass. And so now he's a force to be dealt with. But, and so I can understand why the Republican candidates are very reluctant to cross him because he owns the base. So what that may mean, though, is a really tough time for the next 8 years, meaning for 4 years, Trump will argue, just like birtherism and the birth certificate stuff, that the election was illegitimate and he really didn't lose, and he will do everything in his power to make the incoming president-elect struggle and be as ineffective as possible. He will muckrake as much as he can. And, if Trump decides or threatens or dreams about running again in 4 years, then the Republican Party can't begin to heal. The Republican Party can't move forward in disentangling themselves from Trump, because in 4 years, they're going to need him to run their campaigns again if he decides to run. So this stranglehold that Trump has on the Republican Party, I feel really bad for the Republicans, because I can't imagine they like the fact that they are beholden to a, pedantic, childish, authoritarian, I don't know, all kinds of bad words, but they are, because he owns the base, and it could be a rough 8 years.
A thought somewhat related that I had today. I was listening to an economic podcast about like now that the election's over and it appears that, Biden has won, there hasn't been any talk coming from Trump about what sort of relief type of bill might be next. Before the election, I think he was back and forth on that. First, he said there's not going to be anything, and then there's a huge backlash, like the stock market dropped big that day, and then he acted as if, or maybe he meaningfully thought that he would try to work to get something done. But now that the election's over and it's been some time, we've heard nothing. And the thought occurred to me, maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm right, but it seems to me it's always been about him. Like he would help other people if it helps him. But now at this point, that's not going to help him hold on to the presidency. So why would he give it a moment of thought of helping anybody else if it's not going to help him? So if there's no talk from him over the next couple months, to me, that is a direct sign that he doesn't give a fuck about anybody, because I don't think he does. If their name isn't Trump, or they're not someone that's going to help him, he's never cared for a moment about anybody but himself. And this is the space where he's going to try to be president another way, since he didn't get elected. And that's all he cares about. And he couldn't possibly care about how that negatively impacts the Republican Party or how that negatively impacts the United States of America. It is all about him, always has been, always will be. And I really wish more people that voted for him could see that he doesn't care about anything but himself. And it's so painful to know that he's been in charge.
And it's so obvious that he only cares about himself. This is not subtle. It's not hard to discern. And yet some people just refuse to either see it or believe it. But I totally agree with you. And it's so sad. I'm curious if your cousin on the last podcast accepts the results of the election.
I talked to him briefly, and he actually missed a phone call from him recently, and I need to get back to him. But yeah, I think so. I talked to him the night of the election, or within a couple days, and seems like it's it is what it is, and not a big deal. He's more moderate, I would say, than most, I guess, Republicans. He leans that way, and he votes that way. And I think he thinks that way, but he's very reasonable. Not saying other Republicans aren't, but he very much is. So with him, not a big deal, I don't think.
And I suspect that most Republicans are like that. Most Republicans recognize that you win and lose elections. And I think it's a small, vocal, hopefully not violent minority that are promoting this false narrative of election fraud or a stolen election. And we just got to get past that and not let them undermine our confidence in our democracy.
Yeah, it feels like it'll resolve itself and be okay in the short term. Because there's no evidence, even if every single judge that he put up, I gotta believe that even the judges that are like, they don't need to be political. Maybe it was political when they got in, but they can be judges of the information, and they have to be. If they're not, if they throw that aside and are political, then it's over anyhow.
Right.
But it seems to me that of the three judges that we've only seen a lot from Gorsuch and Kavanaugh, they both made rulings at times that would seem to join in with the liberals of the Supreme Court. And I imagine if somehow, some way, any of these rulings got to the Supreme Court, I'm confident that they would still favor evidence and knowledge and things being reasonable and logical and correct, and not somehow favor Trump.
I sincerely hope so. I suspect you're right. I think all the judges, whether they lean conservative or liberal, are still trying to judge a matter on the facts and on the history of law that apply to those facts. The reality, of course, is that most lawsuits that reach the Supreme Court are lawsuits in the gray areas of social issues and things like that. It's not like, did you get a speeding ticket or not, or, and so that's when the cases are designed to get at those gray areas and try to tease out a small incremental push to one side or the other on legal precedents. And I think that's where we'll start to see the conservative or liberal nature of the judges be exposed.
We've got a couple months here where we don't know what's going to happen. I'd imagine there's going to be a few news headlines that come across that will make someone like you and I just cringe that something's going on.
Yeah.
And I think by the time we get to January 20th, Joe Biden will be sworn in. But what happens in the meantime, the chaos that we ensue, I'm not thrilled about it, Ross. I wish I could feel better about it. I'm relieved that the election's over, but this is a space now where if someone wants to cause havoc and has power, this is the time to do it, I guess.
And that is the one thing we've learned about Trump is if he can do it, he will. If he thinks he can get away with something, he will. And so I unfortunately agree with you that this next month or two is going to be ugly. It's going to be insane. We're going to be jaw-droppingly shocked at things that Trump will try to do. And we just got to know that it's coming and say, man, if our government acts like it's supposed to, it is supposed to be self-correcting. It's supposed to have checks and balances that limit our worst impulses as imperfect human beings. Hopefully those checks and balances will work.
Ross, this podcast began in a lot of ways because of me reevaluating things that I was wrong about and the people that had inspired me to think differently. So if in 2 months we can look back and say that we were wrong, it actually was pretty smooth. Trump just kind of disappeared and didn't really cause any problems, and he went away and just allowed it to be. I would love to be wrong about that. I love that the evidence that I've seen and the conclusions I've come to be wrong. I want to be wrong about it. Please let me be wrong about it.
Amen. I am often wrong, so that's not an unfamiliar feeling. And in this particular case, I hope I'm wrong.
And we'll go to a final segment here. I used to have 2 for a while. I've been going without it, I think, sometimes. Personal growth, being wrong. I think in some ways we can just tie that all together. Ross, you can take it whatever direction you want. I know we chatted a few months ago on a patio on a very lovely evening. That was the first time I'd seen you in a long time, and you've got some things going on in your life. I'd imagine if you want to share something that you think might help someone else, being a way that you've grown or a way that you've been wrong and changed your mind, what is something that you feel in this opportunity you can share that could be helpful to others?
Well, there's probably a lot of things, but just what popped into my mind as you asked the question. We're in a tough time now. Everybody's struggling with the pandemic and with jobs and with income and with paying the rent and with, the politics and the divisiveness. We're in a tough time. But there's a bit of a rule of thumb in the business world. Tough times are a good time to start new things, to plant seeds, to make a change. When things are going swimmingly and you don't want to upset the apple cart, and you don't want to go and do something when your job and your life is going smoothly. Start a new business, do something new. I started my last business, which was quite successful, in the 2007 recession. And now I have left my, comfy and cozy consulting job, and I'm thrown in with a new startup in the middle of all this mess. And so, when you're struggling and things aren't going well, sometimes the risk is actually less, and the motivation and the ease of starting something new. It's worked for me a couple times, and maybe it'll work for others.
If you're willing, go a little deeper into your background so the audience understands what you've been involved in or are involved in now. I know you said you've traveled the world. You've really, I think, had some good positions over your career, and at a point now where you don't need to do anything necessarily. You could sit back and relax and focus on things that don't make you any money for a while, and you'd be okay. So just give me a little more background on yourself.
You're right. I've had great good fortune in my life and career, with health and with successful jobs and business ventures. I've been exposed to much of the globe, traveled around most areas, worked with people from around the world, learned from them. So yeah, and the company that I started in 2007 was acquired in 2016, and that was good for the business and good for us. And this summer, I was kind of thinking of making a change anyway, and with everything in upheaval, and with the, great fortune of being able to contemplate doing things that don't necessarily generate income. I had that freedom. So a colleague out in Boston reached out and said, hey, he's got a great startup. It's in the healthcare space, but they don't know anything about healthcare, and that's my industry. And I did some digging into it, and threw my hat in with him, and we're doing it together.
And of course, you and I first met and know each other through our Free Thought Toastmasters group.
Indeed.
And I think you and I both came into that with some level of public speaking and presenting experience where we felt somewhat competent, but wanted to improve. And I've seen you give plenty of speeches, and you give great speeches. And I'd imagine, can you say that the Toastmasters has helped you since you've joined it, and some of the things that you've done since then?
Absolutely. I do present often in business settings, but Toastmasters has been not only delightful personally, with meeting new people like you and participating in that activity, but as a bit of a foundry for working on these skills. And it doesn't matter how often you speak publicly, you can always work on doing it better. Every time I gave a speech, every time I listened to you speak or others speak, I learned things. And the freedom to exercise those muscles and try and do things a little better. Not only was it fun, not only was it rewarding, but I think, it helps make things a little better at the same time. So it was a win all around.
Excellent. Well, we haven't been in person at a Free Thought Toastmasters meeting in many months, and it'll be many, many more, but I'd hope that we keep involved in that, and it leads to more advantages in our futures. And I'm excited to hear about some of the things that you've going on, and checking back with you in the podcast at some point in the future, I'm sure.
It would be my pleasure. There's always lots to talk about.
Thank you, Ross.
My pleasure, Curt. Thank you.